All right, Chav on Zoom, we're still good? Excellent. All right, I will say good morning, a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors, thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves. To thank the Daf Yomi Shir for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in memory of Mr. Milton Martyr Mordechai Dav ben Rafal Kohen Zichron Livracha. To thank the Elbaum Mishpacha for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in commemoration of the yard site of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Couple, Ben Rav Abram Menachem. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. I will say with that, let us begin. So I will say today's daf is Pehei 85, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem at 2 dots. Right, thank you. 2 dots on 84b, 2 dots on Pei Dalid Amud Beis. So we'll say, so let's go. Says the Gemara. So we are now 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom. So the Mishnah said, Kohanim uluvim nenim li yitlu. So if you remember again, we had 2 cases in the Mishnah. Case number 1, Rachel's married to Reuven. So Rachel says, or it doesn't have to be Rachel, by the way. It could actually be anyone, but fine. Person says, Kohanim uluvim nenim li. I hereby make a neder prohibiting Kohanim and Levim from getting any benefit from me. Okay, the impact of that neder, what does it do in terms of Trumas and Maisrus? So the Mishnah says, in that case, yitlu al karcho. Ultimately, again, Kohanim and Levim have the ability to take Truma and Maiser against the will of the vower. Against the will of the vower. Okay, that's case 1. Case 2, the Mishnah says, the case 2 is Kohanim elu Levim elu. Case 2 is where the Mishnah says, the vower says, these particular Kohanim or these particular Levim cannot take Truma and Meiser. Then what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, elu nanimli yitlu achirim. So those specified Kohanim and Levim cannot take the Truma and Meiser, but other Kohanim and Levim absolutely can. Fine. So we'll say, so says the Mishnah. Alma, what do you see here? Now we'll say, we spoke about this yesterday already, but a quick chazara. If you remember again, the idea that we spoke about when it comes to Truma and Meiser. Obviously, again, I'm the Jewish farmer, I'm a Yisrael. I separate out Truma and Meiser. Who does the Truma and Meiser belong to? Who does it belong to? Kohanim and Leviim. Kohanim and Leviim. Now, granted, Meiser Rishon, technically speaking, a Yisrael could eat as well, but let's just go with the idea it belongs to Kohanim and Leviim. So as Yisrael, what rights do I have in this produce? What rights? I have what's called Tovas Hana. Tovas Hana means I have the right to decide who to give it to. That is a right. So I'll say, so now here we go. Says the Gemara, Alma, Tovas Hana Eina Mammon. Now both say, now let's analyze this just a moment. The critical shaila we're going to deal with now is something very interesting, which is, does Tovas Hana, the right to decide which coin or Levi to give the Truma Meiser to, does that right have a financial value or not? Now, what the Gemara says is as follows. We're going to see why that's very important in just a little bit. So let's analyze this. In case number 1, I make a neder. My neder is no Kohanim and Levim can get any benefit from me. Right? That's the neder. So what's the halacha? Kohanim and Levim could come and take Truma and Meiser against my will. They could just take it from me. So what do you see from here? You see from here that Tovas Hana does not have a financial benefit. Right? Why? Because if it had a financial benefit, then what? Then when the Kohanim and Levim show up and take my Truma Meiser, what are they doing? They're getting Hana from me. The fact that Kohanim and Levim are allowed to show up and take my Truma Meiser indicates that Tovas Hana is a right, but it is a right without financial value. So the Gemara says, Alma, Tovas Hana Eina Mammon. So yet, we'll say Ema Seifa. Yet, again, look at the last part of the Mishnah. What does the last part of the Mishnah say? Kohanim elu or Levim elu. If my neder was these particular, I named the Kohanim, right? So Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu cannot get Hana from me, right? Moshe, Eliezer, and Gershom those Levim can't get any Hana from me. If I name them, then what's the halacha? Yitlu achirim. Then the other Kohanim, in other words, other than the named Kohanim, other than the named Levim, can go ahead and take Trumas and Maestros from me. So what do you see from here? Avalahani lo. But the named Kohanim and Leviim can't. So what do you see from here? Alma, Tovas Hana Amamim. They both say, now the fact that the named Kohanim and Leviim cannot take the Truma and Maestros, what does that indicate? What does that indicate? That Tovas Hana does have a financial value, right? Because if it didn't have a financial value, then halacha l'maisa, they would not be. If it didn't have financial, then even the named Kohanim and Leviim should be able to take it. Stand Rabbi will say, what do we have? We have a contradiction. From the first case in the Mishnah, it sounds like Tovas Hana does have a financial value. From the second case of the Mishnah, I'm sorry, just the opposite. From the first case of the Mishnah, it sounds like Tovas Hana does not have a financial value. From the second case of the Mishnah, it sounds like Tovas Hana does have a financial value. So which one is it? To which the Gemara says, here we go. Lokashya, Harebi v'Harebi Yosi. Rabbi Yehuda, two different opinions. They both say this Sanya. Here we go. Listen to this. Hagonif tivlo shel chaveiro va'achlo. It's very interesting. I will say. Here, listen to the following case. Reuven comes along, and Reuven steals my tevel. So what does this mean? I have produce, right? I just harvested my field. I have not yet separated out trumas and maestros. So therefore, again, I have crop, right? I have grain, and my grain is tevel. Reuven comes along and steals my tevel. So Rabbi says, now what's the shaila? So now the question is, va'achlo, now he consumed the tevel. He consumed all of my grain. Now, Reuven wants to be about tshuva. So he comes along now and he wants to go ahead and compensate me for the theft. So what's the shaila? What does he have to pay? So listen to this. Mishalim lo dimei tivlo divrei Rebbe. So Rebbe says, look, what does he have to pay me? He has to pay me the value of the tevel. Now both say, now what's the value of the tevel? So Bepashto's value of the tevel means everything. Right, everything, the entire value of that crop. They both say, b'pashtos, what that means is the tevel, right, and also whatever the trumas and the maestros were inside of that as well. We'll define this in just a moment. So, Direi Rebbe. So, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Omer, Eino Mishalim Ela D'mei Chulin Shavo. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says, no. What does Reuven have to pay me? What does Reuven have to pay me? Only the amount of what would have been chulin. In other words, when Reuven consumes the crop, he doesn't have to pay me back for truma and meiser. Why not? Truma and meiser wasn't mine. In other words, right? It was my crop. It was my tevel. So ultimately, again, now Reuven stole the whole untithed pile. He ate it. Now what does he have to pay me back? So Rebbe says he's got to pay me back demei tivlo, the entire value of the tevel, entire value. So Rabbi Yossi Yehuda says no. He has to pay me back the chulin amount. Why? Because the meiser, again, the truma and meiser wasn't mine. So he doesn't have to pay me back for something that's not mine. The truma meiser didn't belong to me. Truma meiser belongs to the Kohanim and Leviim. Now he's not going to have to pay back the Kohanim and Leviim either. Why not? Because the meiser, this is called mamon she'en lo tovin, money that has no particular claimant. In other words, there's no particular Kohen or Levi who could claim that Reuven caused them to lose out. Because of that, there's no claimant, therefore, again, he doesn't have to pay. But Lamaisa, what Yehuda is saying is, he doesn't have to pay me the value of the entire crop that he stole, only the amount of chulin that would have been in it, for that represents my portion. So, my labakam, so what are they arguing about? So, top of Pehei, here we go. Top of Pehei. Fine. There's more to talk about in this. Fine. So I'll just point out. Fine. All right. Let me just mention this now. The Ran points out over here. The Ran points out that when Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Huda says, when Rebbe says Demei Tivlo, see Rabbi say. So actually, take a quick look. I'll go back to Pei Daled Amud Beis for just a moment. I'm sorry. Mishalin lo Demei Tivlo. So ultimately, again, so the Ran says over here. So he says Demei Chulin Shabo. Udmei Trumas Amaistros Lefi Tovas Hana Sheyesh Lo Bahen. So I'll say, let me explain this in just a moment. So now let's go back. I have grain. Reuven untithed grain. Tevel. Reuven steals my tevel, consumes the whole thing. Now what does Reuven want to do? Tshuva. In order to do tshuva, what does he have to do? Pay me back. Pay me back for what he stole. What's the machlokes? What does he have to pay back? So let's work backwards. Rabbi Yossi Yehuda says the only thing he has to pay me back is the chulin that was in the grain, because that's really what he stole from me, the chulin. That's the part I could have consumed, that's the part I could have eaten, and that's what he has to pay me back. Rebbe, on the other hand, holds that he has to pay me back the value of the tevel. Now I will say, what's the value of the tevel? So even Rebbe agrees. He has to pay back the chulin, right? That's obvious. Pay back the chulin piece. Plus what? It can't be plus the actual value of the truma and meiser in it. Why not? Why not? That's not a value to me. It's not a value to me. But it must say that what Rebbe means is, what does he have to pay me back? Tovas hana. The value of the tovas hana. I had truma and meiser in my possession. I also had the choice to give that truma and meiser to someone. That choice, right, that right has a value. Reuven, by stealing my grain, deprived me of my value, and therefore when he pays me back, he's obligated to pay me the value of that right, however we assess that, the value of that right, plus the amount of chulin. So it says the Gemara, so what's going on over here? So what's going on? So my love b'hakamiflagi. So we'll say, are they not arguing about the following point? The top of Pehe, the Rebbe Sava, Rebbe holds Tovas Hana Mamon. Rebbe holds Tovas Hana is Mamon. Rebbe holds that they'll say the right to choose who to give your truma and meiser to is a right that has a value. And therefore, again, when Reuven steals my grain from me, not only does he have to pay me back for the chulin in that grain, but he also has to pay me back for what? For the value of the right that I had to assign truma and meiser. Rebbe holds it's mammon. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Savar, Tovas Hana Mammon. Rabbi Yossi, on the other hand, holds no. The only thing Reuven has to pay me back for, Rabbi is what? The only thing he has to pay me back for is the chulin. But Tovas Hana, while it's true, it's a right, but it's a right that does not have a monetary value. Now I will say, now why is this important? Because it could very well be that these two opinions are reflected in the two different cases in the Mishnah. Case number one in the Mishnah, right? Ultimately, again, where I'm making a neder that no Kohanim and Leviim could come and eat my Truma and Meiser. So the Mishnah said that ultimately Kohanim and Leviim could come and take the Truma and Meiser against my will. That reflects the view that Tovas Hana does not have a value. That's the opinion, ultimately, again, of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Whereas the second case in the Mishnah, where it says that I make a neder, certain Kohanim and Leviim can't come and eat my Truma and Meiser, that those named Kohanim can't, but others can, that reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi, that Tovas Hana does have a value. So it's a fundamental machlokes, to which the Gemara is low. The Choli Alma Tovas Hana ain't a mammon, not true. In fact, everyone agrees that Tovas Hana Shibose. I just want to point out, everyone is agreeing that there is a right that exists, right? What's my right? What's my right? My right as the Yisrael farmers to determine who gets my truma and who gets my meiser. What the Gemara is suggesting is right now, everyone agrees that that right does not have a monetary value. Doesn't have monetary value, right? So the Gemara says, Kuli Alma Tovas Hana ain't a mammon. So what's the machlokes? This is very interesting. Elahacha b'matanos shelo hormu kamiflagi. So here's what's interesting. The machlokes over here is when you have produce from which truma and meiser has not been separated. What does this mean? We'll say, take a look at the ran. Ran is on the left-hand side. This particular ran is 3 lines down from the top. Matanos shelo hormu kamiflagi. The Rebbe Sava, Rebbe holds kevan shelo hormu trumos and meisros havilu kechulin shebo delav kimish hormu damyon. We'll say Rebbe is of the opinion that before Truma and Meiser has been separated, it's chulin. The whole thing is chulin. And that's why I will say Rebbe holds that when Reuven steals my pile of wheat and consumes the whole thing, what is he obligated to pay me back for? What is he obligated to pay me back for? The value of the entire pile, in fact. Because before Truma and Meiser has been separated, it's not viewed as existing. It's simply looked at as chulin. Conversely, Rabbi Yossi Savar, Kimi Shohor Mudamyon, Ve'ein lo bahem klum. Rabbi Yossi, on the other hand, holds that when you have a pile of grain, the fact that I know that there's truma and meiser in that pile, it's as if truma and meiser has been separated already. And therefore what? When Reuven steals the pile and consumes the entire pile, he's essentially viewed as having consumed chulin, truma, and meiser. And therefore the only thing he has to compensate me for is what? is the chulin inside of it. So I will say, so an alternate version. In this version, everyone is agreeing that tovas hana is not a monetary right, right? Or it's not a right with a monetary value. So what's the machlokes? The machlokes is how you view unseparated tithes. Rebbe views unseparated tithes as being chulin. Therefore, the whole pile is chulin. Therefore, Reuven consumed the pile of chulin, and therefore Reuven has to compensate me for the entire pile. Rabbi Yosef says, no. We know that there's truma and meiser in there, even if it has not yet been separated, and therefore, again, Reuven is only obligated to compensate me for the value of the chulin in that pile, independent of this of the future to be separated truma and meiser. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. Now, if it's really true that tovas hana ultimately, again, is not a monetary value, then who cares? Mali hormu, mali lo hormu. What does it matter if Trumas and Meiser are separated or not? Ella hainu taima de Rebbe. So I'll say, here we go. Rather, the real reason of Rebbe is as follows. Listen to this. Kansuha rabbanon liganov kihechi dilo lignov. I will say, this is fascinating. The Gemara says, the reality is, everyone agrees that tovas hana is not mammon. Right? The ability or the right that I have as Yisrael to determine which Kohen, which Levi gets my Truma, gets my Meiser, that is a right, but that is a right without a monetary value. So watch this. What's the machlokes? Let's say the machlokes is when untied grain, when tevel is stolen, who are we going to penalize? Get ready for this. Rebbe holds, we penalize the thief. Penalize the thief. Then I will say, in reality, when you go ahead, listen to this. Listen, it's fascinating. In reality, when Reuven steals untithed produce, right? Reuven steals untithed produce from me. He consumes it, and now I want to pay him back. I will say, halachically, right? To make it adin, what should he have to pay back? What should he have to pay back? Just the chulin, right? Really just the chulin, right? Because I know that within that pile of grain, there's chulin, there's truma, and meiser. Did Reuven steal the truma and meiser from me? Did he steal the truma and meiser from me? No. What did he steal from me? Tovas hana. But tovas hana doesn't have a value, monetary value. So in reality, what did he really steal from me? The chulin. But Rebbe says we're going to penalize the thief. How do you disincentivize, right? Disincentivize, right? How do you disincentivize theft, right? Make it hurt. So if you steal untithed produce, now thief, you're actually on the hook for the value of the entire pile. Not the pile minus Shumas, the entire, and the hope is that by levying this significant financial penalty against the thief, it's going to make the thief think twice before going ahead and stealing the produce. So I would say that's Rebbe. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Saras, and this. Rabbi Yehuda holds, no, he holds Kansuha Rabbana Balabayis Kihechi de Lishi Lativle. This is incredible. On the other hand, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda holds that ultimately, again, Chazal penalized the They penalized the produce owner. Why? In order not to go ahead and maintain untithed produce. So in order to go ahead and encourage people to tithe as quickly as possible, if you go ahead and you have your produce stolen, the only produce you're getting back is what? Is the chulin sheba and nothing else. So what does this do? It just incentivizes the owner to go ahead and tithe his produce as quickly as possible. This way he'll be able to dispense the necessary tithes. Incredible. So we'll say, so that's the machlokes. But I just want to point out, but bottom line, interestingly enough, the Gemara is suggesting that everyone is agreeing that tovas hana is not mammon. So I'll say, here's the problem. So we'll come back to the halacha in this in just a moment. The problem I will say is, well, Rava Amar, let's look at now Rava. So I'll say, so now, here's the problem we have. We're still left now with the contradiction in the Mishnah. Because remember, again, we have two cases in the Mishnah. Case number one is I make a neder, no Kohanim and Levim can get benefit from me. What's the halacha in that case? Kohanim and Levim can do what? They could show up at my house and take their Truma and Meiser. What does that show you? That Tovas Hana is not Mammon. Because if Tovas Hana was Mammon, then they are taking a value from me, they're getting Hana from me, which is in violation of the Neder. Case number two in the Mishnah is I say, these Kohanim and these Levim can't take Truma and Meiser. What's the halacha? So those Kohanim Levim cannot take Truma Meiser, but what? But what? Others can, which shows you that Tovas Hana is a value. So how do we reconcile that? So we'll say, so we have not reconciled it. So it comes along Rava. Rava says, Shiny Truma, Dahainu Taima de Yitla Karcho, Bishum de Truma lo Chazi el Kohanim. So now listen to this. Take a look at the Ran for just a moment before we get started. So the Ran Rava says about 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from before it gets wide. So watch this. So Rava Amar, Rava says, Shiny Truma, Kilomar Kulamas Nisin is Lutavas Hana Mamon. So let's listen to this. Rava holds that in reality, everyone agrees that Tovas Hana is Mamon. We're reversing course now. Everyone agrees that the right that I have as the Yisrael to determine who gets my Truma and Meiser, that is a right that has a monetary value. So now let's work on this. So we'll say, based on this, the second case of the Mishnah makes sense. Right? What was the second case of the Mishnah? I make a neder, these Kohanim, these Leviim cannot get benefit from me. So what's the halacha? Those Kohanim, those Leviim cannot get my Truma Meiser, but who can? Who can? All other Kohanim Leviim. So that makes sense, because what does that show me? That Tovas Hana has a monetary value. Therefore, the name Kohanim and Leviim can't take Truma Meiser from me because they'll be getting benefit. But what do I do with the first case of the Mishnah? What was the first case of the Mishnah, or the first of the last two cases? I make a neder, all Kohanim and Leviim cannot get benefit from me. So what's the halacha in that case? What say? What's the halacha? They could come and take it even against my will. But what about the Tovas Hana? So watch this. Look at the Gemara. Rava Amar, Shani Truma. Here's the reason. Mishum, the Truma lo Chazal Kohanim. So let's remember again. Who is Truma fit for? Right? Truma can only be consumed by Kohanim. Now watch this. When I make a neder saying Kohanim and Leviim cannot get benefit from me, which means they cannot get benefit from my Truma and Meiser. So I'll say, if Kohanim and Leviim, if Kohanim can't get benefit from my Truma, who can? Who can? No one. Which essentially means I've relegated my Truma to the status of what? V'chiven de ka'asi l'misri alayu shavye afra ba'alma. I will say, once I've assered my Truma, ultimately again to all Kohanim, then essentially what does my Truma become? Like the dust of the earth. And once it becomes like the dust of the earth, what is it, Rabbi say? It's hefker. Sounds familiar, right? So think about this. What do we do by bittul chametz? Libata v'leheve hefker ke'afra da'ara. So we'll say this is absolutely fascinating. So Rava says, even if you hold Tovas Hana is mamon, in this first case, or I should say in the second case, in the first case of the Mishnah, where I'm saying my truma should be usher to all Kohanim. Well, if my truma is usher to all Kohanim, that means it's not fit for anyone. If it's not fit for anyone, it effectively becomes like the dust of the earth. If it becomes like the dust of the earth, it effectively becomes hefker. If it becomes hefker, then who could take it? Any Kohanim. Aren't they benefiting from me? No, they're not benefiting from me, because we'll say, who are they getting the truma from? Hefker. And we'll say, again, as we saw from Leket, Shechacha, and Peah, right? Even in our previous case in the Mishnah, where Rachel makes a neder not to get benefit from anyone, she can still collect Leket, Shechacha, and Peah. Why? Because she's not collecting that from someone. Who is she collecting that from? From Hefker. So we'll say, absolutely incredible. Now take a look at the Ran again. The Ran says, Rava Amar Shiny Truma, Kilomar, Kulamas Nisin is Tovas Hana Mamun. Our Mishnah actually reflects the view that Tovas Hana is actually Mamun. It has a monetary value. The Seifa Necha, the Kohanim Elo Yitlach. So I'll say Yitlachem. So I'll say, so now the second part of the Mishnah, which is again where she's just making a neder against certain Kohanim, other Kohanim can come and take that, makes sense. So why in the Reisha, where she makes neder against all Kohanim, why do they have the right to come and take the produce even against her will? The Truma lochaz ye'el Kohanim. Right? Truma is only fit for Kohanim. She afshar litna li'isra hilchach kevan da'asra alayu shavya afra ba'alma da'afkira le'tovas hana sheish laba. So we'll say really incredible. Really incredible. So Rav has just a dramatic interpretation. So we'll say in this interpretation, so again, Tovas Hana is Mamon. Tovas hana is mamon. If that's the case, has a monetary value, case number 2 makes sense. Case number 1 is difficult. Tutrava says case 1 is not difficult. When you ask for truma upon all kohanim, you've effectively relegated truma to the status of afar, to the status of dirt. And because it's dirt, it automatically becomes hefker. Because it becomes hefker, any kohen who wants it has the ability to come and take it. Incredible, I will say. So bottom line, by the way, how do we paskin? Does tovas hana, or is tovas hana mamon or not? Now I will say, I'll tell you why this makes a difference. So I'll say, listen to this case. The Rambam, Hilchos Ishus, Perakei Halacha above, chapter 5, Halacha 6. So also listen to this. Aval Yisrael shekidesh b'truma shefish migrano enu mikudesha. So also listen to this case. I am a Yisrael. I would like to get married. So I give a woman truma. There's only one problem, right? I'm a Yisrael. She's a Yisraelis. So I say to her, no problem. There's a value in this truma. What's the value in the truma? Tovas hana. Take this truma, right? Hariat mikudeshas li bitovas hana sheyesh bizu. Right? In other words, take this truma, and now you have the right to give this truma to whoever you want. Now, watch this. Does the kiddushin work? Now, it depends. What does it depend on? Does tovas hana have a monetary value or not? If tovas hana does have a monetary value, then I have just given this woman an item of value. If tovas hana has no monetary value, then what have I given her? Nothing. So paskins the Rambam, eina mikudeshas. Why? Shahari eino lemachra, she can't sell it. Ve'ein lo ba ela tovas hana. The only thing that exists within this truma is tovas hana. And again, the Rambam paskins, ultimately, again, tovas hana eina mamon. Shabbos say that is indeed how we pass halacha l'maisa. There is a constant, there is a right, an exercisable right that a Yisrael has to give his trumas and maestros to whoever he wants. But that right does not have a monetary value. Good, incredible, I'll say. Incredible. That's the halacha. Says the Mishnah, konam she'eni osa api abba. So what's this interesting case? See here. Same case, Rachel's married to Ruvain. And in this case, she takes a neder. What's her neder? That she is not going to do anything for her father. She's not going to give any anafar to her father. Okay, konam sheni osapi abba. I'm not going to do anything literally for the mouth of my father. I'm not going to give enough for my father. Or api avicha. Or she makes a neder to Ruvain. Ruvain make a neder. I'm not going to do anything for your father. V'api achi. Or I'm not going to do anything for my brother. V'api achicha. I'm not going to do anything for your brother. So what's the halacha in all of these cases? Eino yachal lahaver. Rabbi say in all of these cases, he is not permitted to annul her vow. Now, Rabbi say, why is he not permitted to annul her vow? Why not? We know this. Why not? There's no inui nefesh, and it's not dvarim shebeino lebeino. Take a look at the Ran on the last line in yachal lahaver. De'ein elu nidre inui nefesh, because these are not afflictive nedarim. V'lo dvarim shebeino lebeino. Nor are they nedarim which govern anything in their marital life. Therefore, he has no power of revocation. Next, sheni osal picha. Listen to this. What happens if Rachel makes a neder? Rachel, right? The neder is Ruvain. I make a neder not to do anything for you. I'm not going to do anything for you. Sheni osal picha. So what's the halacha? Eno tzarich lahaper. Rabbi say in this case, he does not need to annul the neder. Why doesn't he need to know the neder? Rabbi say because she is bound to provide certain things for him, right? If she works, her earnings go to him. There are certain other domestic responsibilities that she has towards him. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, making a neder to undermine those obligations is an ineffective neder. So when it says he doesn't have to annul it, it means that the neder never even takes effect. There's nothing to talk about. So I'll say, if you look at the Ran, by the way, the Ran just goes on to the next page. Shani osa picha eino tzarich lahafer. If we take a look at that Ran, he says, Mishum deshabude, excuse me, Mishum deshabude mishabedes lei, v'lav kol kamine demefkas lei l'shibude. Because she's obligated to him in certain things, and her neder doesn't have the ability to undermine her obligation towards him. Fine. So we're saying, now watch this. Rabbi Akiva says, no. Sarach, Rabbi Akiva Omer, so Yafer. Rabbi Akiva says, husband should annul this neder. Why should he annul this neder? Shematadif alav yosem min haroi. Because perhaps she'll earn more than she is obligated to give to her husband. I will say, let's talk about this just a moment. Rabbi Akiva agrees with the Kor Halacha. So Tanakama says, Rachel makes a neder to her husband, Ruvain, I'm not going to provide any benefit to you. So what's the halacha? What does Tanakama say? The neder is batal. There's no neder. There's no neder. Why? Because she's undertaking a neder that would undermine her core obligations that she has towards her husband. Such a neder is fundamentally ineffective. Husband doesn't even have to annul it at all. Rabbi Akiva says, you know what? Husband should annul it. Why should he annul it? Rabbi say because of something called hadafa. We learned this in Ksuvas. Rabbi say a wife is obligated to contribute a certain amount to the household, right? So let's say she's obligated to earn X amount of dollars per week. Now we'll say that amount that she earns, that goes towards the household. What about additional amounts that she earns? Baruch Hashem, she has a good job. She makes a lot of money. So we'll say, what's the status of funds above and beyond that core amount? The answer is, she's entitled to that. She is entitled to that amount. So Rabbi Akiva says, husband really should annul that neder. Why? Because ultimately, again, if he doesn't annul that neder, the neder will devolve upon the additional amount of money that she earns that he is not entitled to. Look at the Rush for just a moment, Rabbi. So the Rush is on the right-hand column. It's 4 lines up from the 4 lines up from the bottom. Shematadif yosem min haroi b'ksuvas mefarishla kami oselo v'hamoser yichola lahakdish. I will say again. So there's a certain core amount that she brings into the household that he's entitled to, right? When you say he's entitled to, that goes to the support of the household. But there's hadafa, additional amounts that she brings in, she has complete control over. Therefore, again, Rabbi Akiva, diada have v'chal alava hekdish v'avi dvarim shebeino lebeina. The Afshar Liyos Shlois Arev B'Shalo. Shabbos is very interesting. Rabbi Akiva holds that Allah Lamaisa, husband should annul the neder in this case. So when Rachel makes the neder that I'm prohibited to give benefit to you, Tanakama says, no, neder is batal. Neder is batal. Husband doesn't have to do anything with it. Rabbi Akiva says, no, you should really annul it. Why? Because that neder could take effect with what we'll call additional earnings. Because additional earnings, ultimately, again, husband is not entitled to. And Rabbi Akiva holds, now this could become dvarim shebeino lebeina, and therefore husband really should exercise the right of revocation over this neder. That's Rabbi Akiva, right? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, Yafer, shema yigar shena utehei asura. Very interesting. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that Lamaisa, he agrees with Rabbi Akiva that husband should annul this neder, but ultimately agrees for a different reason. Rabbi Yochanan says that ultimately, again, he should annul the neder because the neder could be chal on additional amounts that she earns. Rabbi Yochanan says no. The neder is not going to be chal during their marriage. But what could happen, I will say? What could happen? If they get divorced, that neder could kick in. Right? Because once they're divorced, ultimately she owes him nothing. So because she owes him nothing, the neder ultimately, again, could take effect. In order to prevent the neder from taking effect, what should the husband do? Simply annul it now. Good. So we'll say, so 3-way machlokes about what should, right? Rachel takes a neder. I'm not right. I make a neder. I cannot give any benefit to you. So what should Ruvain do with that neder? Tanakama, what should he do? Nothing. Because the neder is essentially void, because she's making a neder to undermine current obligations. Rabbi Akiva, what should he do? Annul it. Why? Because that neder could take effect on additional amounts earned. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, annul it, because perhaps when they get divorced, if they get divorced, that neder could actually take effect. In order to go ahead, I will say, by the way, if that's the case, so you'll say to yourself, so who cares? They'll be divorced. So who cares if that takes effect? So I will say, so the Ran actually explains over here on Amud Beis that the issue is, I will say, if the neder takes effect, once they're divorced, let's say he wants to remarry her, right? That neder would preclude him from remarrying her. So therefore, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, just annul the neder now, so that it doesn't take effect upon divorce. Incredible. So we'll say that's really mechlokes. Let's analyze. Amr Shmuel. Shmuel says halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. The halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So I'll say, what does that tell you? Remember the kasavar Shmuel. Adam makdish davar shalo bali olam. So we'll say, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. So remember again, what does Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that in reality, Rachel makes a neder. I'm not permitted. I'm making a neder. Konam. I'm not going to give you any benefit. Right? Any benefit. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says you should really annul it. Now, why should you annul it? According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, does this neder have any marital impact? The answer is no. What is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri concerned for? That they're going to get divorced. They're going to get divorced. And what's going to happen? Now the neder is going to spring into effect. And suddenly again, she is usher to give him any hana, which could preclude remarriage, which would also preclude just him getting any benefit from her in whatever way. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, annul it now. Now we'll say, again, does the neder have any present impact? Zero. But annul it now because of its potential future impact. So the fact that Shmuel says Allah is like Rabbi Yochanan, what does that tell you? That tells you that a person has the ability to consecrate something that is not yet in existence. Rabbi say why? Because the same way that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that you should annul a neder now, even though it has no current impact for some future potential impact. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that you could essentially negotiate something now in the present for something that may occur in the future. So similarly, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri or Shmuel must also hold. So Shmuel says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri must also hold that a person could consecrate something that has not yet come into existence. In other words, you could negotiate a reality now for something that what? Does not yet exist. Take a look at the last Rush on the page. The Rush says, Adam makdish davar shel bali olam ta'adayin lo girsha. Because remember again, the same way you can be mevatel this neder, but yet what? He hasn't divorced her yet. V'im lo na v'gam lo nasa ma'isa biyadayim. And nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. Shabbos said the Gemara is supposing this. The same Shmuel who holds that the halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, right? Namely, again, that the husband should annul this neder because of what it may become, would also hold that what? You could be makdish, you could consecrate something that has not yet come into this world. But is that true? Or minu arei zekasha, hamakdish ma'aseh de ishto, if a man goes out and consecrates the earnings of his wife. Right, so husband says, wife, right, Reuven says to Rachel, anything you earn is hegdish. So what's the halacha? Amud Beis will say, harezu osa va'ochalas. So we'll say, listen to this. The halacha is will say, she has the ability to work, and whatever she earns, ultimately again, right, she's able to work and earn, which is another way of saying that halacha l'maisa, her earnings are not hegdish, va'mosar. What about any additional amounts? Rabbi Meir Omer Hagdish. Rabbi Meir says they're Hagdish. Rabbi Yochanan Sandler Omer Chulin. Rabbi Yochanan Sandler says that they're Chulin. But Rabbi Shmuel says Halacha Rabbi Yochanan Sandler. The halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan Sandler. So we'll say, what does that mean? So we'll say, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? So we'll say, just to paint this picture. Reuven says to Rachel's starting the first day on her new job. Reuven says, Rachel, whatever you earn is Hekdish. It's so beautiful, like to be frum on other people's accounts, right? Right? All right. I'm really dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash. So whatever you earn is hegdish, right? And Rachel's like, what is Rachel? Very often when husbands say crazy things, wives say whatever, right? Whatever. Right? So what happens? So she goes to work. Rabbi say, what's the status of her earnings? They're hers. What's the status of additional earnings she owns beyond the amount needed for support? Rabbi Yochanan Sandler says they're hers. Namely, the hektish designation did not work. V'amar Shmuel, halach Rabbi Yochanan Sandler. Rabbi Shmuel says halach Rabbi Yochanan Sandler. What do you see from here? Alma ein adam makdish davar shelo bali olam. Now, both say, what is the problem with the husband consecrating his wife's earnings? What's the problem? Right, problem is him. That is true, right? But the problem is, they don't exist. The earnings don't exist. So in this case over here, the husband is being makdish a davar shelo bali olam. He is consecrating something that doesn't yet exist. And what do you see from here? The consecration doesn't work. So you see from here that ein adam makdish davar shelo bali olam. Person can consecrate something that doesn't exist. So what do you see from here? A contradiction in Shmuel himself. right? Previously, we were saying Shmuel holds that the halacha was Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, namely, annul the neder now because of what may occur. What may occur. So it sounds like Shmuel is saying, Adam makdish davar shebal olam. Here we're saying, again, in the case of the actual earnings, Ein Adam makdish davar shebal olam. So what's going on? V'chi tema, ki kamra halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, al hadafahu dika amar. Maybe again, Shmuel's just saying that halacha was Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, just for any additional amounts. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, lema halacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri ba'adafa. So just then say that. Then say that. Inami. The other possibility is halacha kitana kama. Or Shmuel could have also said that halacha was. In other words, maybe we're saying maybe Shmuel says that halacha was Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. That's only for additional amounts. Maybe the core amount is actually consecrated, but additional amounts are not consecrated. If that's the case, say it. Or Shmuel say that the halacha for the follows the Tanakama. Inami say Einach Rabbi Akiva. Say like that's Rabbi Akiva. I'm Rabbi Yosef. So therefore say therefore we're stuck. We're stuck, right? We have a stira, we have a contradiction between the positions of Shmuel. I'm Rabbi Yosef shiny konamos. The truth is Nedarim are different. Rabbi say why are Nedarim different? Hoil va'adam oser peros chavera alav. Since a person has the ability, I will say, to ultimately answer someone else's produce on himself, oser nami davar shalo bali olam. So I will say this is fascinating. The same way that I could answer my friend's produce upon myself, I could also answer a davar shalo bali olam as well. Now I will say, what's the comparison between these two? This is very interesting. So the Ran essentially explains that halacha l'maisa, my friend's produce is like a davar shala bali olam for me, which makes sense, right? I have nothing to do with my friend's produce. So for me, right, my friend's produce is like a davar shala bali olam. The fact that I have the ability to answer my friend's produce upon myself, just like I could answer that upon myself, I could answer a davar shalo bali olam upon myself as well. I'm going to Abai says 1 second. Bishlama adam oser peros chavera alav. So I will say, I understand why I could answer my friend's produce upon myself. Shari adam oser peros chavero. The same way that I could answer my produce upon my friend. Ela yes, or davar shalom the olam chavero. But I will say, do I have the ability to answer a davar shalom the olam upon my friend? Shari ein adam oser peros chavera achavero. That can't be in the same way that I can't answer my friend's produce upon my friend. Ella Amrav Huna. So I'll say actually we'll stop over it for today. So I'm leaving you kind of in the middle of all of this. But I'll say we leave off in the middle of this. So again, what we're left off with is a stira in Shmuel. Does Shmuel hold a person can ask for a davar shalom bali olam, a person can't ask for a davar shalom bali olam? That remains to be continued tomorrow, and the implication that has on our Mishnah, particularly on the position of Yochanan. So I'm sorry, leaving off kind of mid-sentence. I'll say shkoyach.
Things are the road tomorrow.
Oh, 1 o'clock.
How we get the road around the sun.
Perfect. Bush Lema.
So physically exhausted.